All right, let's now look at channel operators, also called chops. And chops is this green family. And chops are dealing with all kinds of signals, so signal flows. So we're dealing, like, anything that's got to do with audio is working and happening in chops, and anything that's interactive, any kind of devices that you're connecting with, like Kinect, Leap Motion, your mouse, MIDI devices, keyboard, DMX, all that kind of stuff. So let's look at what a channel actually is. So I'm going to drop a constant chop in here. And what we see here, or what the constant is really doing, is just giving us one static value that we can change here. And what a channel really consists of is a name and one or more samples or values. So in this case, we have one sample with one value, which is right now 0. We can change this here. So we can, like, say it's, we can just define the value here, basically. We can also type in 10 or 100 or 100,000 or like -20 or like 0.3, whatever we want to type in there. Just resetting this so we can see it. Yeah, so we always have this kind of representation here. So it's kind of a relative representation, and we're going to look at a different way to look at channels later. All right, so this is like one way. We can add more channels here. We can also change the name to like my channel, for example, or like B, or like I don't know, channel 3000. So this way we can add and also remove channels. And then you can see they're being like shown here, like one after the other, like in a list. And we can change the specific values. All right, so that's useful for really just setting values that are static. Let's now add something like an operator that can create dynamic chops, channels. So I'm dropping an LFO in here, and as you can see, we have a value, like a channel that's constantly going smoothly between -1 and 1. And that's because we have an LFO with a type sine wave. So this is really just creating a sine wave. And we can always use a trail, to kind of a trail chop. If we just connect that to whatever operator we have, we can kind of see what's going on here. So we have like a sine wave. And we can also change this to a triangle, and then you can see what that does pretty much. We also have a ramp. It's just going up from, like, now it's changed the range here, and now it's just between 0 and 1. And we also have a pulse, so it's kind of like a heartbeat kind of thing. And we can also like change the frequency here and the offset, so now it's in a different range, and all that kind of stuff. All right, so that's the LFO pretty much. We can also here like define many channels, and as you can see, they're all doing the same thing. And here you can see them being represented in a different way. All right, so that's the LFO. If I'm gonna drop a noise in here, and now you're gonna see this is being shown in a different way, more closely to this. I'm actually going to delete this now. And on the noise, I'm going to go to the comment page here and turn this time slice on. And I'm going to get back to that in a second, but yeah, there's basically just two different ways to look at chops. Anyways, what we have here now is one sample, one channel with one sample, and that's just showing us these values that are kind of that are based on this on this algorithm that we've already seen here. So as you can see here, that like it says simplex. We have Perlin here. We don't have actually Perlin here. So there's different kind of different kind of algorithms that we can use, that different kind of people have created. So and in TouchDesigner we can use these in different sort of ways. So here we're using them as pixels, and here we're just using them pretty much just as a number or as a sample. So now I can change like the period here, change a lot of stuff about this if I want to. Okay, and again I can go to the channel and just create different ones. Whoops, if I was able to. Okay, and as you can see, unlike here, we have a lot of different channels. They're like kind of behaving in the same way because we've set the same parameters here, but they all kind of, because they're based on noise, they're like never really the same. But you don't need to fully understand that, so right. But this is just basically giving us a random number, and we can make this completely random, so it's not smooth, smoothed out pretty much. We just put this type to random, then you can see we really get a random number every frame. All right. So let's now look at how we can actually use these channels, because now we've just created them and they're like not really useful to us. Let's say we have a circle and a top. And I'm gonna change this resolution here, and I'm gonna change the radius down so you can see it nicely. So something like this, I guess. And let's say now I want to move the circle from right to left, just kind of bounce between the right and the left side of the screen. So I just turn this on. I'm gonna actually just add a transform here, make it this black, and add a null here, and then just display that so you can see it in the background. Okay, so to change this position, like the circle's position, we can go to the X here and just go back and forth between that. And as we can see, we kind of want to be in a range between -0.4 and 0.4. Something like that. And all right, so how can we animate this now? We can now use a channel here. And first I'm going to just make one channel. I can just call this pause X, because that's what it's doing, driving the position X. Because we're using this channel now to export that here. So let's add a null here. So we always do that when we export something. We always I always it's good practice and a good workflow to always add a null, and I'm going to show you why in a second. So now I can make this active, like to make the viewer active here, and just you can see this becomes green. I can drag this onto here, onto the center X, and then let go of my left mouse. And now I have a few options. I can either export the use chop reference, or use the current chop value, but that's not very useful right now. So we can either export the chop, and you can see now we're just using this position, or we can also, we can't change anything here now. We can't go in here and type anything. We're really just using the sample as it is. So we can now grab that, drag that on there again and say chop reference, and now it's going to turn into this blue color. So you can kind of switch between these here, and also switch between the static one there. Now we see this little Python expression, and I generally like working with that a lot more, because now you can actually type stuff in here and change this channel on the go. So that's pretty useful if you want to just quickly change something. So for example, let's say I wanted to just have this go from -0.4 to 0.4. I can just multiply it by 0.4, and now it's doing exactly that. So that is one way to change this range, but actually generally I wouldn't recommend doing it this way. Generally I would recommend, and now it's great that we have a null here, because now we can just add a math here, and that's what I would recommend to use, a math chop. So MathJob is pretty powerful. You can do a lot of operations that we're not going to look at right now. You could either multiply it here as well. Also just type 0.4 in there. But even better is to, we know the range is between -1 and 1 on the input coming in here. So we can type that in here as well. So let's type -1 and 1. So it's like from range, it's going from -1 to range, it's going to 1. From -1 to 1. That's what we're typing in here. If this was like a Gaussian, for example, that is just going between 0 and 1. So we just leave that at 0 and 1. But it's a sign right now. So, all right, as you can see now, this is like going to the center and then to the right, because we're like changing the position now from -1 to 1 to 0 to 1. So let's change this now to -0.4 and 0.4. And now we've set the range to be exactly that. We could also say, I don't know, 0.42 maybe, to even get closer to the edge. Okay, so why would we do that? It's a lot more work than just multiplying it there. Well, we can also now change the range here to like 0.2, and now it's like going there, and then I don't know, something like that. We just have a lot more options here to work with, where it's easier to work that way and more clear. Okay, let's say we now have we also have a pause y in here. Then right now we're just using this channel, so it's all right. But let's actually insert a select here, and with the select we can now just, as many channels as there are, we can just select any of them. So we can now just type in pause x here instead of the asterisk. The asterisk always just means we take all the channels, and this just means we just take the pause x channel. Okay, great. So let's just copy and paste this, and let's say we want to make this go diagonal. So we could now change this to like -0.2 and 0.2 maybe, and then drag this onto the pause y, and now it's kind of going not like just right to left, but also like slight top bottom movement. Also I actually want this to be pause y, and as you can see it displays an error now because we have the channel pause x selected. So we can just change that there, or we could have just dragged it onto there again. All right. You could also, I don't know, we could, for example, here we could use this for the size. So we could now, I don't know, select A and rename this to size. Then I could make put a math here again, and then maybe put this from like 0.05 to 0.2, and attach a null here again. And now I can use this on the radius. So you can't only drag things onto this field, you can also drag them onto these names, and then you're like referencing to all of them. So I could do the same here. And as you can see now, it's like changing its position there. It's kind of too big for me. All right. Let's now get to samples versus time size, because what you can see here, like not samples, I don't know, whatever, forget that. There's two different ways to look at chops, or two different formats in a way. So I'm just gonna drop a null here, noise in here again, and I'm gonna like turn this off for a second so we don't have to have that bouncing ball in the background. What we can do, if I just copy paste this and go to the comment tab, I can now turn time slice on. So now we have two noises, and they have the exact same configuration here because we just copied and pasted them. And the thing is, they look different though, as you can see, and they're like 2 different modes, as I said. And this mode is like a like the so-called time slice mode. So if you turn this on, it's like a time slice mode. And this, I don't know if that has a name, but I'm just gonna call it graph mode. So you know, because it's a graph. Yeah, what's the difference here? What's going on here? Here we have like a graph that is displaying 600 samples right now. So if you middle mouse click, I just had a stroke. We see we have 600 samples here. So 600i means 600 samples, and we have like 1 to 601. So also like 600 samples. Yeah, and so this is like the x-axis is like the sample amount or number, and here we have on the y-axis we have like the values that the samples hold. So right now, wait, some German coming through there. Wait a second, I'm gonna change this on the channel here to samples, and now we see, oh, it's 599, and here we have 0. I also changed this to samples. We're starting from sample 0 and go to 599, so we have 600 samples in total. So I'm going to change this to like 49, so we have 50 samples. Now I can right click in here if I turn this viewer on. By the way, you can also like drag this around and press H to center it again. You can right click here and say like turn the dots per sample on. I don't know why they did that. Okay, so now we see we have 50 samples here nicely lined up in this graph. So each of these samples kind of has like its ID or number. So it's like 1, 2, 0, 1. No, wait. It should actually be 0. I'm kind of, it's a bit weird that it's starting at 1 here and starting at 0 here, whatever. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so forth. And each of these samples holds a value. And in this case, so if I just change this to 0, it's the same thing as here. That's not moving, but that's all right. What's happening here is that we're just showing one sample at a time. So we're just going through each of these points one after the other, and showing them at the specific frame or at the time. So yeah. All right, so the difference is like here we have 50 samples and here we have 1 sample, but it's still one channel. And so if we go here to the transform, I can kind of just move through this, and then we're doing kind of the same thing as here, but we're just looking at 50 points or samples at a time, and here we're just looking at 1 sample at a time. All right. So I could also I could just animate this, and then it does that automatically. A bit too fast. There we go. Yeah. So we always see 50 samples there and 1 here. And so why do we do this? So for being able to control a position, for example, or like the size, we need to have a time slice, because we always want to have one value at 1 frame. Because if I just pause this at frame 92, we don't want to have 50 values for 1 circle. But if we had 50 circles, we would use this because then we would have to we would want to have 50 values. So if you're just working with if you're just using this as like 1 channel to export to 1 parameter, obviously you can export this 1 parameter, this 1 channel to more parameters, but still you just have 1 value. And we're gonna get to this later, instancing it's called. Then it uses then we're gonna use all of this to, for example, drive or specify 50 different positions or sizes of circles, for example. All right, so Also, we're using this kind of view in two other kind of examples. So we also have, like, when we're working with audio, then we're also working in this kind of view here, or mode, because a song has a lot of samples, you know. And another thing is, let's say we have a noise, and we change this its Y resolution to 1. We can now, like, convert this to a chop, and now we can see these values are being represented here in just a different format. So here, I showed this example in another video, but yeah. And now we could, like, select one sample of these. We could just select the hour one, and now we're just looking at the red channel. If we make this monochrome, turn the monochrome off, then yeah, it's gonna be different kind of outputs here. All right, so it's probably quite confusing in the beginning. That's totally all right. But you're gonna be working a lot with chops, and you're gonna also be working a lot in these two different modes. So one last thing to that, I guess, that might be confusing. It's still confusing to me. If you go to the comment page of the LFO, for example, here you can change this to a non-time slice version. And then there's also the wave chop, which only is in the graph, only works in the graph mode. You can't really change the time slice. I can't change it to time slice mode. I do not know why, but you just kind of have to accept that. Most importantly, what you kind of need to understand here is, like, what channels are. So it's really just data, numbers pretty much, numbers, and you can export them to like different operators. So you could also export this to here, for example, and so it works with all the other families. All right. Now let's move on to the subs, and I hope this makes more sense in over time.